Hand screwdrivers. We're going to talk about hand screwdrivers. I initially was going to do all these for just one video, but I realized I wanted to focus specifically on the multi-bit drivers. The 6-in-1, 11-in-1, whatever you want to call them, are sold by a lot of different people. So I'm going to focus this video strictly on the 6-in-1, where you pull out a bit and flip it around. We've got three brands that we're going to talk about: Home Depot's, Lowe's, and Ace Hardware's. And then I'm going to follow that up later with a different video on all these other screwdrivers, because I don't want to kind of skew. I want to do just a couple of tests with the other ones, and even though I consider myself the king of ridiculously long videos, I'm going to try to keep these a little shorter, and we're going to go over some of the things that I like about multi-drivers like that, and some of the things I don't like about them, which is way outweighs what I like about them. I'm not fond of the multi-bit drivers. They do have their uses, but personally, I don't really use them a whole lot. So we're going to talk about why. We're going to do a few little tests with each one of them, and we're going to figure out which one's the best, in my opinion, arguably the best, which I've been wrong before, and we're going to talk about that later with arguably the best screwdrivers here. And we're going to talk about that over here. So let's get started. These will be shown in the video probably following this one, and then we're going to continue on with the EDC quote series, mini series, with pliers and all that other stuff. So right now, let's go take a look at the 6-in-1 style screwdrivers from three different companies. All right, we have our three contenders here. We are going to go over the Husky brand from Home Depot, the Ace brand from Ace Hardware, and the Kobalt brand from Lowe's. Each one is different. The Kobalt is branded as a 6-in-1. The Ace is branded as a 4-in-1, and the Husky is not branded at all besides Husky and the product number. This product number actually will not come up on the Home Depot website. However, I can assure you it's there. There are actually, and just to note while I'm thinking about that, on the Husky brand, there is two different ones that you can sometimes find. One of them comes in a blister pack. This one will have, wrapped up in the standard cardboard blister pack type thing. And then the others you can find just sitting in a box of like 12 of them, kind of like you would find these at Ace Hardware, sitting in a box. And they are simply shrink wrapped to keep it together. And I did notice that the blister packed version is the exact same thing, and it's $1 more. So this one was, I want to say, $6 or $7. This one was $5.99 at the front counter at Ace, and the Kobalt was the most expensive of them at $7.99. I may be off a little bit on that. I'm going to put right here the pictures and the actual prices that I paid for each one. However, I do recall the Kobalt being the most expensive one of them, and it is also the only one that is marked as a aluminum or metal, and that is this part right here, and all the way back here is aluminum compared to plastic. I think Delrin is what they make this out of, or this may be Delrin, or this type of plastic. So we're going to go over some of the things. We're gonna test a few of them in some of the more common lock situations. Now, I do want to go ahead and get this out of the way, and I'm going to say this in every video. Many people say, okay, so why would I buy a $9 screwdriver? Hey, we're done with screwdriver. Oh, let's just start this over. Why would I buy one of each screwdriver like this when I can just buy one for $6 or $7 compared to $9 or $10? Now, this one the tip is gone on, but this approximates what is in this screwdriver. Before this tip was chewed off and reground, it was this tip right here, and then this is the number 2 tip, and number 1 Phillips, and the 3/16 style tip. So this one driver replaces all 4 of these but we're going to go over some of the things that I do not like about multi-bit drivers and why I prefer to stay with these. Now, I do prefer these for field work, and just because, you know, I do so much field work that these just don't really make the cut for me. Now, these are great for bench work. If you do bench work, these are perfectly fine for the most part. If you are in the field, I'm going to show you why I prefer the fixed shank to the multi-bit drivers, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. And again, you can get multi-sets with all these in there. This is a, what is this, channel lock? This is Klein. These were bought individually. This came as a big set. So you often see, you know, 29-piece sets of screwdrivers. It's got the stubbies and all that. Yeah, those are okay, but there's this, not part of this video, but in the next video we're going to talk about why it may be better for you just to buy these particular drivers for sets or buy one of the multi-drivers. Now, these are all practically the same style of driver. There are little minute differences. As I said, this is aluminum while these two are plastic. They all have distinctively different handle shapes. The Husky is 6-in-1, and the difference between a 4-in-1 and 6-in-1, actually this should be a 5-in-1, but you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and you see this is stepped down right here. It's a smaller shank, so you cannot fit this side in that side. And that is 2 nut drivers. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 technically. With the Ace driver, now that's the same way with the Kobalt. Kobalt has a step down section here, so this would be a 6-in-1 as well. And the Ace, compared to those, is the same on both sides. It does not have a step down, so you can take one bit off and put in the other side and vice versa. However, so it's a 4-in-1 is what it's labeled, but it also has this kind of what I call an emergency nut driver. We're going to talk about that for a second, but in a second we're going to talk about that in a second. So, but the fattest, they're all about the same length. Let's take a good old-fashioned measuring stick here. They're all about 6 inches. If we line them up, put them out side by side, you can see there is really no difference. Make sure they're all pushed in. We'll put them into the handle, end to end. And we can see, when we line it up this way, that the Kobalt comes in the longest, and also the fattest handle of the three. The Husky is the slimmest, most, I guess you could say, ergonomic. It's very sleek, and it's got a small ring here. Now, when you are looking down, say you were looking straight down at this while you were unscrewing something, having that small diameter right here really does help compared to this bigger diameter. Now with this one, you could put a pair of pliers on it. There's an advantage right there, or a wrench to get you some torque. However, that is not at all a good idea, because I have twisted apart many of these shanks. These shanks are not made for heavy pressure, so having this on there might be good, but definitely not recommended for use. Of course, it's going to scar it up unless you use a box wrench or an open-ended wrench or a pair of Nipex with the parallel jaws. But definitely the fattest of the three. Put them all up side by side here. Let me come on the other side of the camera. Get better light. We can see the Husky, Ace, and this one. So smallest, medium, and biggest. As far as the grip, this is hard plastic all the way up. The Ace is soft plastic. It's kind of slicky, slippery, very soft feeling, and it is definitely softer plastic. Very soft, easily cuttable. Whereas this is like a Delrin. And then aluminum, except the grip is rubber, so it's rubber, kind of rubbery, and rubber over aluminum. There are ratchet versions of these, and I'm probably going to talk about this in a different video because this is not about that, but there are ratcheting versions of this, and I'll go ahead and say right now, ratchet versions, while they're great for the initial once you, in most of Locksmith's world, once you break that initial and then you start unscrewing, the screw is too loose for the ratchet to effectively keep loosening it. And I found that I will break it with the ratchet and unscrew it a few turns and then have to either lock it and just unscrew the rest of the way. So if you're thinking about a ratchet, screwdriver, ratchet means a whole different thing in some parts of the world than others. If you're using it to drive in screws, you know, by hand, which most people are going to use a drill, of course, but if you're doing that, I mean, that would be great to have the ratcheting driver. But as we're going to see in taking apart padlocks and stuff like that, ratcheting is not great because once you break that initial hard thing to turn and turn it a couple of times, the screw is going to be loose enough, you know, it's finger tight at that point. You can unscrew it with your finger, and with the ratcheting driver, with it loose like that, it effectively voids out the way it can ratchet. So it slips, it doesn't unscrew. It's just a little problematic. I don't prefer the ratcheting, except if you're using it to drive, you know, wood screws all the time, or other screws that are tight all the way down and all the way out. So that's why we're not talking about ratcheting versions of this, but we're going to go ahead and get started because this video is already getting too long. We're going to go ahead and get started just testing the different tips on some of the more common locksmith situations that you're going to run up on. And yeah, that's it. Let's go do that. Before we get started on the actual locksmith part of that, we're going to talk about that number 5 and 6 and the 6-in-1, which, if we remove the tips, is the nut driver. Now, they all have the same nut driver when you remove the number 2 Phillips bit. Oh, I need to keep those correct, right? It's easy to tell the Kobalt. Kobalt's made out of this shiny metal. They call that CRV metal, whereas the other ones are both just plain metal. No real opinion on that material, but we are going to talk about this. So we have a 8/32 and a 6/32 nut and screw, and this one is the 8/32, this one is the 6/32. Now 8/32 will not fit. So this is the large size, is a 6/32 screw or nut. Tools it. All right, so that means there's a smaller side, and that smaller side would be for presumably a 540 or a 440. I don't have one out. I didn't want to dig that deep to find one. So basically, you're never ever going to use the nuts that are part of it. So to me, they're all 4-in-1s. They're not great anyway. I say never ever. You may run up on one every so often, but in the locksmith trade, you're not going to run across those a lot, except in situations where somebody has rigged something. In fact, I just ran up on one the other day, but most of the time, you know, 8/32 is going to be the start. So if somebody rigged up a screw that was broken, it's going to be 6/32 or bigger, and obviously going to use bigger nuts. What was rigged up was a panic device with the outside trim. Somebody had rigged up a 8/32 screw with nuts on each side. It was messy, so we got to replace all that. But even then, it wouldn't have done me any good because the 8/32 is too big for any of these. So really, there is nothing that you are going to need the nuts that are part of this for. So that breaks us down to the number 2 and the most common ones, which I have talked about, are the this one and this one. Number 2 Phillips and 3/16 cabinet tip. Again, the tip is very important on your flatheads because there are the wider tips like this and this. You are looking for the narrowest one that you can find because very frequently you have to go down into a recess, and let's take a look at that. Okay, I found an extremely good example of why you would need the narrower tip. On some mortise locks you might run across a screw that is considerably shorter than this, and as you can see, that is down in a recess. So if you only had the wider tip, you are not going to be able to, if it's deep enough, you are not going to be able to get a grip because the tip is too wide to go into that. So if you have the narrower tip, you are free to go just as deep as you need to. And yes, you will run up on mortise locks that have extremely short screws. Somebody came along maybe and just replaced the screw, so it's really deep in there. Most of the time they're right at the surface. However, one reason to have the cabinet tip style driver. If we pull out the 3, go ahead and back this out. And we can see we could go all the way down with that. So if you bring in any of these, you are automatically limited to this. All 3 do fit. All 3 have the parallel instead of it being flared out. But you are totally limited on depth right there compared to just a standard screwdriver. Next, let's look at mortise cylinders. Another big thing that you're going to use a number 1 Phillips driver for all the time is unscrewing the screws from mortise cylinders. We're going to flip our 3/16 tip back to number 1 Phillips, and let's take a look really close at how each one sits in the heads of the screws. Now the pointier these are, sometimes they don't sit right or don't sit very well. In certain screws, this one is pretty pointy, so it does stick out a lot. So that gives you more of a chance to both round off these edges and strip out the screws. We'll look at Huskies, also pretty pointy. Seems like it sits down in there just a little bit better. And Ace Hardware's. That kind of fits like... They're all 3 kind of different. Now that doesn't go very deep at all. handle feels really slicky. I grabbed right onto that. This is the Husky. That does well, that grabs right in. And the Kobalt. It feels a lot kind of slipper, it doesn't grab as well as the other ones do. It's very, very close though. Hard to say for sure. But all three work. As you know, is the smallest diameter shackle hole that uses a Phillips screw down in there. So we're going to give it a shot. Let's go ahead and flip it over to the number 2, because a number 2 Phillips will work on the screws. We know the small one will get down in there just barely. If that was any deeper, you might have a problem, but there is enough clearance to get it down in there. However, you can use the number 2 bit for these. It actually fits perfectly, which means the ends of those are 1/4 inch. Unscrewed and tight. Same way with, wait, yep, we're on the right one, with the Kobalt. Unscrew and tight, and with the Husky, unscrew and tight. No difference really in that. Also, the Avis 8345 uses the screw. We're just going to check how the depth does there. Got just a little bit less room actually than on the other one, but you can still reach down and get to that screw. Okay, so we're going to go up to the deadbolts over here. This is your older style quickset deadbolt, and as we see, it uses the non-removable style screws, and it also has a flathead screw on it. This is one of the most common things that you're going to run across, and you might say I never see deadbolts at all. Well, actually, Smart Key does the same thing. Some of the first gen heavier duty deadbolts use these, as well as the wiser heavy duty deadbolts. So you will in fact run across this way more often than you would think. So of course there are particular drivers to get these non-removable screws out, but you can just as easily usually do that with a flathead screwdriver. We're going to try all of them. Now we're going to hold up this, and that looks like, when you're doing this, you don't want the tip to be too wide and scratch the hole. So that one is going to be too wide. We're going to have to knock it down. We're going to have to use the smaller side for that. Hold it up. See, that'll work. Go ahead and flip all of them around to the smaller flathead and give it a go. Alright, starting with the Ace hardware. Basically, you just put pressure on it. Now, it does help sometimes to tighten one side down, but then you have a really tight other side. So, as you can see here, we got this one loose. And let's go ahead and try that with the Kobalt. Works. And lastly, the Husky. Believe it or not, y'all, the screwdrivers actually work as intended. So once you unscrew this part, you will be faced with the hollow screws, and they are unscrewed with a flathead screwdriver. So most of the time, since I almost always carry the fixed 3/16 cabinet tip, I usually just grab one side of this and start unscrewing. So it's no big deal to me. Probably not great for the tip of the screwdriver. However, if you can do the same thing, or if you want to be precise about it, you can switch to your fatter tip, and it also fits very well in there. We'll try the fatter tip on all three of them. This one is just a little, seems a little bit narrower for the Kobalt. And now Ace Hardware's flat fits really well as well. So this deadbolt is one of the prime examples of a good use to have a multi-driver for, so you only have to carry one. If we look at another version, this is a board lock by Sargent. Board lock, it is held in, you have to turn the key to expose, or pick it to expose the flathead screws. You can see in there, if I can angle that right, or a Phillips head. So again, we want to look and see if this is going to fit in there. And it is a 1/4 inch hole, so it just barely goes in. Of course, again, you could use the #1 Phillips head to get that off. And once you get those screws out, you will find the same hollow flathead screws that those are going into. So yes, in the cases of those two styles of deadbolts, it would be very handy to be carrying a multi-driver, so you don't have to carry two. Let's look at the reason why I don't like them. The single biggest thing that you do when you are in field locksmithing is unscrew doorknobs. Pretty much the biggest thing. And with doorknobs, and you may not believe this, but I've actually had somebody call from an apartment one time and said, hey, my maintenance guy needs to know what kind of screwdrivers you use to take doorknobs off. I was like, what do you mean? She goes, well, it's hard getting to the screws because it's at an angle. I was like, well, just a screwdriver. That's why I always recommend round shank instead of square shank, because with square shank, while you could clamp that up to a pair of pliers, I've always felt like having that square, when you're unscrewing it, when you're in a hurry and you're doing 50 of these or 10 or 20, however many is on the house that you're working on, you are more likely to scrape up the finish with the square or hex shank. So I always prefer the smooth. All three of these have smooth, so that is not a big deal. However, it is, again, if we look at our control, which is #2, standard Phillips 4-inch, we have plenty of room right here. With the multi-drivers, we do not have plenty of room. So it is definitely shorter, and as you are unscrewing, you have to do it in an angle here. And having the fatter shank kind of limits how well you can get as close to the side. With the narrower fixed, you can come in at a better angle than you can, you know, if it's here. Let's see if we can see. It will stick out a little bit. So in this instance, we are having to go in at a sharper angle simply because of the diameter, and that is going to be the case with all three of them. No difference there. No reason to talk about that other than the fact that it is what it is. You have a fatter shank to accommodate the bits, thus you have to go in at a sharper angle compared to what you would do with the regular. So that is the biggest #1 reason, pretty much one of the only reasons why I prefer this to these, is because of that angle right there. And it's just one of those things that I feel like having the round shank lets me go in a little bit better, especially when you have to screw and unscrew a bunch of them. But really, there's no difference in the three of them doing that. They all are exactly the same shank. In fact, you can pull this, put this over here, put this in there, that, pull this, put this here, put that there. So they're all the same as far as that goes. And since they're all pretty much the same diameter, there's no difference in how they work on taking doorknobs off. Lastly, one other thing, let's take a look at one of my other biggest pet peeves. Losing the bits or breaking the tip. I do while I have this in my hand. This is one of those giveaways. If you go to conferences or stuff, this was mailed to us by Schlage when they came out with their NDE because they were promoting this is all you needed. This is a same thing, 4 or 5-in-1, nope, 6-in-1's got a step. And this Aces, you'll see these a lot. Aces is pretty much the closest to that. But this is hard plastic and this is a softer, grippier style plastic. But the biggest thing is, okay, here's a Greenlee brand. I can't even get it. That's one problem. Okay, so there's the biggest problem right there is I can't even get this apart. Another one is, this is a 11-in-1 or 12-in-1 or something. But if we grab this Klein, missing a bit. It still works on one side, luckily, so do these as well. If you're missing this bit, it will still function. All of them, I believe, will not change because they all are stopped by this mechanism. However, if we flip through here and find the one, this was a 11-in-1. Here's my example. Broke the flathead bit. Now, of course, you can probably order these from somebody, but you just really don't do that. You just go buy a new one. But that's what happens when you grind it down. It sinks it down. It's supposed to be sticking out to about there. And I don't really like the 11-in-1s a lot because of how you have to kind of flip through, but this particular one is a multi-tap style. It's got these taps, so I kind of like having this as a backup quick emergency way to tap holes. Very good for that. That's the only reason I would keep one. And the single biggest thing that I don't like about 6-in-1 screwdrivers or any of the in-1 style screwdrivers, and that is keeping it in your back pocket, and when you pull it out, the bit disappears. So I'm going to try to see which bit dislodges the easiest, and hopefully it will be caught in that thing. So actually I'm gonna do one thing first. Hold on. Yeah. All right. So Ace Hardware. It comes out. It comes out with velocity. All right. Well, there goes that plastic bin. The tip gets a little. So that's one thing I don't like about these. If you haven't figured out what I'm doing this for. is the tip will definitely get lost. Okay, Husky. That was not bad. I can't get it to come off. Okay. And lastly, the Kobalt. Feels like it's wanting to come out. Oh. So yeah, you're losing your tips. We're gonna go back to the Husky. The Husky definitely is the winner. Can't get it to come out. Yep, there it goes. Took a lot longer to, and the whole thing came out instead of just the tip. So comes out very easily. Well, there you go, guys. Husky wins there. Let's go drive some screws real quick and we'll see how grippy the handles are for that. So we're gonna drive some screws in some wood. That's what you do with screwdrivers. Now, before I do this, I'm sure everybody's gonna start screaming about pilot holes. Yes, use pilot holes, but this is just a test. This is a test. We're not drilling pilot holes. This is heavy, solid wood, so we're gonna start with the Kobalt and we're just gonna drive the screws in there. And I want to see how well the handle feels while doing it. Okay, it worked. Fits pretty good in the hand. It's kind of, I don't know, it kind of feels weird in the palm though. All right, let's go to the Husky brand. Okay, so that one was a little slippier in the hand, as to be expected. It kind of, as you were turning, it kind of slipped a little bit more. The ridges here kind of hurt my hand a little bit more, maybe because it was the second one, but it was just a little bit more painful to do than this fatter grip with the rubber on the Kobalt. So it still worked there, right? All right, and lastly, Ace. Let's see how this does. So after the three, I definitely would say have a drill or an impact driver to screw in your screws. And the Ace one, it was kind of flexy. I think that's because of this handle material. It kind of like felt like it was kind of twisting maybe a bit as I was tightening it down. Not quite as painful as the Husky, but not as comfortable as the Kobalt. So the Kobalt would win in this instance for hand. It may have been because it was the first one I did, but that one was the most comfortable to use. Of course, with the fatter handle, gives you a little bit more hand leverage and a little bit more gripping power. So it wins there out of that test. Which one should you buy, Jason? Which one should I buy, Jason? For carrying in a toolbox or tool bag for just minor use, or maybe keep it on the workbench, not to use to drive in screws, I would say the Husky. If you are going to be using it in the field to drive in wood screws a lot, I would say the Kobalt, because it has the thing that you could put extra torque on it, and it is the most comfortable. The Ace Hardware one, it would work. It's just not as sleek. I'm not fond of that handle. I feel like an extreme heat or extreme cold, that's going to get really brittle or really melty, gooey. Don't know, because luckily it's not extremely hot. But for the price, for ease of use, for how slim it is, how you can see real well down, like I was talking about earlier, if you're doing this, you know, you've got kind of a little bit of a sight difference there. And you know, out of them, I would definitely say buy these. $5.99. I'm pretty sure this was $5.99 when I bought it, or $6.99 if it's in the blister pack, and $7.99. I never have been a big Kobalt pool. I'll say that straight up. I've never been a big Kobalt tools guy. I wouldn't really buy this. I only bought this for this video, but I would not really purchase this. My recommendation is to get, and it doesn't have to be Klein. I just prefer Klein. You can also get Ace brand has very much the Klein lookalikes. They're very, very similar to Klein. I've not really used any of the Ace brand styles, but this right here, see how the rubber starts to slip? Right, if I push down, it pushes up. That's one of my biggest pet peeves about it. But either Ace or this one or Craftsman. However, you do want the cabinet tip style flathead, a #1 driver for set screw or screws on mortise cylinders, and a #2 driver. So if you're going to buy anything, get you the $5.99, $6.99 Husky just to have, and a #2 Phillips driver, and this. Now this again seems redundant, but you may be very glad to have the longer shank. So $5.99, $6.99, whatever. The regular Phillips you can get for like $8.99 at Home Depot, and I think the 3/16 cabinet tip maybe at $7.99. So that's about $16, $17, $18, altogether about $25 to get these three. And then if you add on a $10 one of these, you will be fairly good to go for pretty much everything you need to do. So that would be about $35, $40 after some taxes. So yeah, that seems a lot, because you can buy multi-kits, you know, with 30 pieces for $30. If you want to do that, feel free. But just remember, hex shank, not fond of hex shank. Remember, you're not going to use a lot of these big old monster screwdrivers that are in the kit. Very rarely. For most of you who are doing, you know, just residential stuff, unless you're using this as a pry bar, there's not a whole lot of use for it. So with these three, you are good to go. All right, winner. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for the next screwdriver video. I'm going to go over even more screwdrivers. This video was way longer than I expected it to be, but that's what happens. And that's why I'm doing this by itself. So if you have any questions or comments, suggestions, leave them in the comments section. We'll catch you next video coming right up.